Welcome back to my YouTube channel. My guest today is investigative journalist Frank Owen, and with Frank today we'll talk about the murder of Jam Master Jay, the DJ for Run DMC, whose real name was Jason Mizell. And just to summarize for my viewers what happened, this person was in his recording studio on Merrick Avenue, Jamaica, Queens, New York City, when on the night of October 30th, 2002, two men entered the studios and gunned him down. That's the story in a nutshell, and we'll get into the details today with Frank. Thanks for your time, Frank. Thanks for joining me today.
You're welcome. You're very welcome.
Well, you already said something before I start recording, so I'm going to ask you this question again. What sparked your interest in this case? How did you get involved?
Well, I already knew Run DMC from my time as a hip-hop journalist. I initially started off as a hip-hop journalist before I became an investigative journalist. And so, I'd interviewed them on several occasions. And, Jay was the last person you would think of as a drug dealer. In fact, he wasn't a drug dealer when I was interviewing him for places like Jamaica, which was a London publication. The only reason he became a drug dealer was because Run DMC's fortunes fell off, and he had a lifestyle basically to sustain, and that's why he started dealing drugs, because Run DMC were no longer successful anymore. And basically how I got into the story was I became an investigative journalist in the mid-90s, and I was writing about the underbelly of New York club culture, like solving the Michael Alec murder, revealing all the mafia influence in New York club culture, basically being threatened by the mafia all the time. Anyway, so I finished my first book, Clubland, which was all about that. I was sitting beside a pool in Vegas, bored out my mind, and Playboy called up. And basically what happened was they had a reporter already on the story, but he basically wimped out because he was scared for his life. And they asked around. They actually called a friend of mine, John Leland, at the New York Times, and said, who's crazy enough to do this story? And he said, yeah, Frank Owen is crazy enough to do this story because, I've had so many death threats throughout my career. It's not that I'm brave or anything, but it's I have no real sense of fear. So somebody telling me they're going to kill me doesn't actually really kind of scare me. So that's how I got into the story. I started, I basically had 4 weeks to write it. I started out, I knew nothing really about the murder except what I'd read in the New York press. And within a week, I realized who had murdered Jam Master Jay. It wasn't that difficult to figure out, which is why it's so bizarre that it took the federal government 20 years to charge the people I identified as the murderer in the initial piece. It's crazy. Everybody knew who did it. It wasn't a secret,
Yes, absolutely. This is what is weird about this case, that we knew right away what happened, but still it took an incredible amount of time to come to charging somebody for murder. Well, first off, what was your reaction when you heard that Jam Master Jay was shot? Because he was not a gangster rapper, therefore not connected to
a gangster rapper. Okay? Jay wasn't like Biggie or Tupac. Tupac basically, it wasn't like he deserved to die, but he put himself in situations whereby, it was pretty obvious that something bad was going to happen to him. He created enemies. Jay was completely the opposite. Jay was very soft-spoken. He had no beefs with anybody. That was why it was so shocking that Jay got shot. It wasn't shocking that Tupac got shot. It wasn't shocking that Biggie got shot. I'm not saying that they deserved to get shot, but they were gangster rappers, essentially. Jay was all about peace and love and getting along with people. And that's what was shocking about it. Jay was genuinely a nice guy.
Yes, this is what shocked me as well. So you already said that in your piece that you published 1 year after the murder, you already picked up the right killers. You basically cracked the case long before police did that. Can you summarize what
20
led
years
you?
before.
Yeah, a lot, many years before.
2 decades.
Can you summarize what led you to that conclusion?
Well, I mean, it was like it was a process of going through the various theories that were, and there was a lot of theories about who killed Jam Master Jay, ruling out the theories that were obvious bullshit, and then settling on the theory that made the most sense. So there was a whole bunch of nonsense. There was a bunch of stuff that Supreme had killed Jam Master Jay because Supreme was having an affair with Jay's wife, Terry. Well, actually, Supreme was having an affair with Jay's wife, Terry, but that wasn't the motive for the murder. The other one was Curtis Schoon, right? I mean, I know Curtis. I mean, Curtis introduced me to a lot of people, right? It made no sense. I mean, Curtis is a tough guy. He's a scary guy. But it made no sense that like an 8-year-old drug debt would be the cause of Jay's murder, right? And, you know, basically the first time Jay ever dealt drugs, it was Curtis and Jay and another guy. They went to LA. Jay said he had a contact. Jay was new to the drug game. It was Curtis's money. Jay went to meet somebody in Compton. The guy in Compton ran off with the money, and Curtis blamed Jay, right? But that was 8 years before, you know. It made no sense that Curtis would wait that long to exact revenge. So that was another theory out of the way. So basically, it was about going through the theories and and basically narrowing it down to the theory that made the most sense. And the theory that made the most sense was Tinard. Was basically Tinard because, you know, Tinard, and this is the sad thing about the whole Jay saga, is that he was murdered by childhood friends, right? The people who murdered Jay were not strangers. They were his closest friends. It would be like you if you were murdered by your family. You know what I'm saying, right? These are people. It wasn't like he just knew them after he became famous. He grew up with these people. He knew them when they were 8, 9, 10. He invited them over to his house for dinner, right? They'd been best friends since childhood. And that to me is the ultimate kind of moral of this story, is that, you know, it's not so much a moral, it's more like the tragedy of this story, that the people who killed Jay were not outsiders, were people he'd known since he was a child, you know?
Yes, absolutely. This is what happened because this guy you mentioned, Tinard, is Ronald Washington, who goes by his middle name, Tinard. A friend of Jay's since childhood, and he's one of the people who killed him. We'll get into the details of the investigation soon. Let's first start from a few things about the crime scene that, to me, don't add up or probably are not clear enough. So we have this guy who was playing on the PlayStation together with Jay, Uriel Rincon, who claimed that he hasn't seen the shooter like in his face, which is totally absurd to me. What do you think? Was he lying on purpose because he was scared?
The thing about everybody in that studio, except for one person, was a total pussy, right? They all knew who killed Jay, right? They were all men. You know, the one person who actually had the balls to identify the killer. You know who that was?
Lydia High.
It was the one woman in the studio.
I know.
It was Lydia High, right? Those other guys, they were supposed to be his best friends, and they wouldn't tell the cops who killed their best friends. Those people are scum, you know, and they are like a big part of the reason that the investigation took so long. But Lydia High, within a year, she had identified Tinard as one of the shooters, as one of the killers, before a grand jury. Do you have grand juries in Italy? You know what grand
No, we
juries
don't.
are?
We don't, but I know what it is. Yeah.
Well, right. So that there's secret, like basically affairs whereby the prosecution puts forward a case, and then the grand jury decides whether to indict. They don't decide guilt or innocence. It's basically just to say, well, okay, there's enough evidence to proceed with the case, right? Now, the weird thing about it is, one of the things they say in America is a skilled prosecutor could indict a ham sandwich before a grand jury because it's very stacked in favor of the government, of the state, right? For some reason, I've never been able to figure out the grand jury rejected Lydia's testimony, even though her testimony was completely right. So I don't know whether it was incompetence on the part of the government or whether Lydia was just really nervous and she didn't come across well. But she did identify Jay's killer a year after the murder in front of a grand jury, but the grand jury rejected it.
But in your opinion, if Lydia High is the only person who actually recognized this person, Tinard,
No. She's not the only person who recognized him. They all recognized him. They
You're right.
all knew who killed Jay. She's the only one who had the balls to tell the police that.
Tell the truth. You're right. I didn't phrase it the right way. That's what I meant. But since she's the only one who actually said the name of the person she saw, how come she gets so blamed for hiding the truth? She's actually the only one who told the truth.
She did tell them. Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, who's blaming her?
Well,
Randy Allen. Randy Allen, the biggest scumbag on the planet.
The press.
Well, maybe initially, but I don't think anymore. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that Lydia was the stand-up guy. You have that phrase in Italy, stand-up guy. No. It's kind of like means like it's like a mob phrase, meaning somebody who like will stand up, and tell the truth. She was, I mean, I have a lot of respect for Lydia for what she did, and it's within that kind of culture and that sort of community, that's not an easy thing to do. I mean, it did not. I mean, she basically had to go into hiding after that because, the whole ethos is basically you don't tell the cops shit, right? Yeah. But having said that, the police totally fucked up the investigation to begin with because what they did was they tried to they arrested them all, and basically tried to intimidate them into cooperating, which is the worst thing you can do, right? I mean, in a case like this, what you're going to do is gain their confidence and gradually draw them out, and so that they will eventually, tell you what they know. Threatening people doesn't work in a case like this. They just clam up, and the initial. You got to remember, the initial investigation was carried out by the NYPD. It was not a federal case, right? Yeah. Did you have that distinction in Italy between federal and state? No. You see, if it's a murder in New York, and that's all it is, right? That's a state case. That's NYPD, right? Once they found out it was a murder committed as part of a conspiracy across state lines, which is where the Washington, D.C. and Baltimore connection comes in, then it becomes a federal case. And it's only once the FBI came in that it actually became like a professional case, right? But by that point, basically the NYPD had alienated all the key witnesses, They completely approached this the wrong way by basically threatening to jail people. So basically, the law of the streets, came about. It was like, snitches get stitches. We're not going to talk to you, especially if you're threatening us, So everybody clammed up, But even having said that, all those people in the studio, well, not all of them, but most of those people in the studio had been childhood friends of Jay's. If your best friend from childhood had been murdered in front of you, right, and you saw it, would you not tell the police something? It says a lot about the character of those people that they never said anything. You know, I
Totally.
don't care. I don't care about, oh yeah, well, we don't tell the police anything. He was your best friend. You saw him murdered, and for 20 years you remained numb. What does that say about you?
I totally understand and I totally agree with what you're saying. So Mizell was bringing a gun with himself at
Well,
all times. Was it because he was suspicious that someone was going to kill him or to attack him, or it was just regular personal
no,
safety?
I mean, it wasn't that he never carried a gun. He did sometimes carry a gun. He'd been involved in a shootout a few years earlier when some jealous guys, I guess, from the Bronx had started an argument with him and started shooting at him. It wasn't that firearms were unknown to Jason Mizell, but he didn't. It wasn't a regular thing with him, right? He didn't. He wasn't constantly strapped, right? No, the reason he had the gun on him all the time was, according to his closest friends, was that he was getting threats from people, right? Presumably the people connected to this drug deal, and he felt his life was in danger, and that's why he had the gun on him during the night of the murder. This was not just a regular thing.
Yeah, okay. And also something else that is weird is that the CCTV tapes were totally useless because probably they were too old. That's a total accident, I think. It's not something deliberate.
I mean, I don't know either, frankly. I mean, it is confusing. I mean, yeah, I mean, sometimes people put in CCTV cameras and then just forget about them. You know what I mean? They think the fact that they have the cameras there is somehow protection, and it doesn't really work unless you actually change the tape occasionally. So yeah, I don't know, but that was always certainly was always a puzzle. Well, I mean, it's possible, I guess, that the people in the studio changed the tape after the murder. I don't know that. That's just pure speculation. But yeah, I mean, it's never really been resolved, at least to my mind, why that tape was an old tape, was not a tape currently, from the day of the murder.
I also did try to enter that studio once in
Yeah,
Jamaica.
I've been there.
Of course,
So it's very
the
small, tiny, tiny.
I couldn't because the door was closed and I didn't ring to anybody. I just tried to open the door and it was closed. But it's quite a peculiar
You didn't
place.
miss much. It's like somebody's small studio apartment. I mean, it really was tiny. I mean,
Nothing.
there's a walled off section where the mixing desk was, and then there's this kind of reception area and a recording area. It wasn't a big place. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't some, super duper 24 track, I mean, digital studio. It was very, very basic.
I know. I saw the pictures. And it looks very basic, as you're saying. So we now know that Ronald Washington, better known as Tinard, is the person who forced Lee High to the ground. So who pulled the trigger? Who's the shooter?
Well, I mean, it's Big D's son, is what they say. Little D pulled the trigger, is what the government is saying.
Well, but we have charges here against three people, one of them being Tinard, the other one being Little D, and the other one being a guy by the name of Jay Bryant. What is the role of this third person?
A perfect example of what I always say. You think you know everything about a murder case, and after 20 years, I thought I knew everything about the Jam Master Jay case. I thought nothing would surprise me. This Jay Bryant character totally surprised me. I talked to my sources and they're like, who the fuck is this guy? So it shows that you can never know everything about a murder case. There's always something you don't know, especially a case like this, which is shrouded in mystery. You know what I mean? I mean, frankly, I haven't looked that much into him because, the case was postponed by a year. And so I had other stuff to do. I mean, I actually wrote like a big article which was supposed to be come out on the eve of the trial, and then they postponed the trial. So I got stuck with this 6,000 word article I couldn't use. Um, so, um, so yeah, I mean, I haven't done a lot of research into him, but I did talk to a few people. And first time they ever heard the name. So he's kind of coming out of left field, but that's the way with a lot of these type of cases. There's always something you don't know. As much as you think you know everything, there's always something you don't know.
Okay, we forgot to explain something. What was the reason why these three people or two people wanted to kill Jam Master Jay?
Drug deal gone bad. What's it always about? It's always about a drug deal gone bad. It was my brother-in-law was murdered in Detroit over a drug deal gone bad. Most of the cases I cover are about drug deals gone bad. I mean, this is this is America for you. I mean, if you legalize drugs, most of these murders would never happen. It's just so amazing to me how many people I know have been murdered over drug deals gone bad, right? And so in this particular case, it was about. I mean, Jay had been dealing for a while, and we're not talking small amounts here. Jay had been moving 10, 20, 30, 40 keys of coke at a time, right? That's not a small amount of coke. You get caught with that amount of coke, you're going to jail for 20 to life, But what he was he thought he was kind of insulated from it because he was never directly dealing the coke. He was like an in-between guy, if you know what I mean. He would basically he developed a friendship with the Black Mafia family. And I don't know if you get that show in Italy, the BMF. They show it in America. 50 Cent, right? So it was Terry Flannery. It was one of the co-founders of BMF, which was one of the biggest African American drug dealing organizations in America. He had a friendship with him, and Terry, liked to befriend famous rappers, And because Jay had a name, he would give him this coke on consignment. So you're giving somebody 40 keys of coke on consignment. That's a lot of money you're trusting them with. Right? So there was no money up front. So Jay would basically, take this coke, get somebody to ship it from A to B. The person at B would sell it, but he would just take a cut because he arranged the deal. So it'd be like, $3,000 to $5,000 a key he would take, So, which doesn't sound like a lot of money, but if all you're doing is making a phone call, it's actually quite a lot of money. If you do it often enough, it's quite a lot of money. So, Jay wasn't like a hands-on drug dealer. He wasn't out at the corner slinging drugs, So basically what happens is this deal in Washington, right? Jay wanted to expand his drug dealing operation to Baltimore. I don't know if people in Italy know Baltimore, but Baltimore. Have you ever seen The Wire?
The Wire? I haven't. I read the book, so I know where Baltimore is.
Oh, you do, right? David Simon's book. Great book, great. So you know about Baltimore, right? So Baltimore's like a huge market for cocaine, and so he wants to expand his drug market to Baltimore because he has a friend there. Because they all used to be part of this same Hollis crew, which was this gang when they were teenagers in Jamaica, Queens. So one of the guys from the Hollis crew, a guy called Takin, Rakim had moved to Baltimore. So they wanted to expand his drug operation to Baltimore, and he was going to be the point man in Baltimore. So Jay goes with Tinard down to Washington D.C. Washington D.C. is near Baltimore; they're right next door to each other.
Yeah.
So he basically gets, I think it was just 10 keys of coke. It wasn't like a huge amount, but it was a substantial amount. So he gets 10 keys of coke from Terry Flannery from the Black Mafia family, takes the coke to Baltimore, and his friend, he was in the Hollis crew with, runs off with the coke. So basically, Jay's out 10 keys of coke, right? So at this point, this is when it becomes murky, right? I mean, apparently, it seems that according to the government, and I never developed this information myself. My reporting this is purely from the government, but the government's theory of the case is that basically this guy in Baltimore and Tinard, they did not get along because Tinard had previously robbed this guy in Baltimore's apartment, right, and stolen all the stuff. So the guy in Baltimore said to him, if the deal's going to go forward, you've got to cut out Tinard. And Jay agreed to that and cut out Tinard. And Tinard was angry. And what was it? 3 months later, decided to exact revenge for being excluded from the deal. That's basically the government's theory of the case. That basically, like, Tinard was seeking revenge for being cut out of this deal after being promised he would be part of the deal. So that's basically the government's theory of the case. Tinard told me a completely different story, of course, when I interviewed him, but they all lie, of course. He told me basically that he tried to blame it on the Black Mafia family, essentially. He didn't identify Terry Flannery by his real name, but by his street name, Uncle. He said Uncle basically wanted the money for the 10 keys of coke and sent somebody to kill Jay. That's bullshit, you know. I mean, I didn't know it at the time because I didn't know Uncle was Terry Flannery, but now I know who Terry Flannery is, and there's no way on this planet that Terry Flannery would have whacked a well-known hip-hop artist, because Terry wasn't like that. I mean, Terry, by the standard of drug dealers, he wasn't that violent, and he certainly wasn't stupid enough to whack a high-profile hip-hop artist over 10 keys of coke when they were moving hundreds and hundreds of keys of coke a week, you know. So anyway, Tinard's story is that basically Terry Flannery had him whacked, but that makes no sense.
I forgot to ask you something about the crime scene. So when Lydia High buzzed these guys in, was she aware that they were Tinard and Little D?
I have no idea.
You don't know?
I mean, it's I don't even know if the cameras were operating. I mean, don't forget that place didn't just have the studio; it had a bunch of other businesses in it, right? And if you know New York, I mean, it's like you get locked out of your building, you just buzz, somebody lets you in. You know what I mean? It's a very typical New York thing. The idea that just because it has a camera and a buzzer means that unwanted people can't get in your building is nonsense, right? I mean, I used to live in a building like that. If I didn't have keys, I would just buzz it, and then somebody would just upstairs would just buzz you in, and they wouldn't check who you are. So it's certainly likely that, you know, you're talking about Jamaica, Queens. You know, I mean, have you been to Jamaica, Queens?
Just once when I went to see the studio. Yeah, just once.
Yeah, I mean, it's not exactly like it's not the Upper East Side. You know, it's not like they're checking. You know, and they had other businesses in the building, so I'm sure plenty of people were buzzed into that building who weren't checked. You know what I'm saying?
I could have done the same when I could not get in.
I mean, if you look at it, I mean, it was like a little crappy little, you know, I mean, there was nothing high tech or sophisticated about that building, you know. I mean, anybody could have got in that building. So the fact that they got in, whether they were buzzed in, whether the camera was on or not, it really doesn't matter. They would have got in anyway, you know.
Well, I know you also spoke to the lawyers of Tinard and Little D. What do you think they will do to try to defend their clients?
Well, the big thing is the time it took, you know. I mean, under the American Constitution, the accused has a right to a speedy trial. This has not been speedy by any freaking definition. Not how long it took. to prosecute them, and not how long it took to bring this thing to freaking trial. I mean, how many times can this get delayed? I've never seen anything like it in my life. Donald Trump, they're trying to prosecute him in 6-9 months. I mean, it's just amazing how long this thing has taken, and that to me speaks to the weakness of the government case. I think that ultimately what the defense will argue is that you can't trust what people say after 20 years. People's recollections change, people's memories change. It's just too long to rely on or confidential informants or eyewitnesses and believe them to be credible after 20 years. And you know what? They have a point. And that's the weakness of this case, that it's taken so damn long to come to this point. Now, if they had some forensic evidence, okay, forensic evidence doesn't date, and they claim this new guy, they found his DNA at the scene, but what are they going to say? They're going to say Tinar's DNA was at the scene. Tinar was in the studio all the time. Everybody knows Tinar's DNA was at the scene. The same thing with little D. So, absent forensic, absent like DNA, forensic evidence, what do they have? They have a bunch of people ratting out a bunch of rat bags, ratting out a whole bunch of other rat bags, So a lot of it is going to depend on how the jury views the government's witnesses. And I can tell you, I don't know every government witness they're putting on the stand, but they are just going to be as bad as the people they're accusing of murder, because they're all involved in this. None of these people are clean, and they're going to come off, if the defense lawyers are good, and I think they are, they're going to come off really badly, especially after 20 years. So do I think they'll get convicted? Yeah, maybe. Do I think it's a slam dunk? No, I don't. Slam dunk.
I think we covered the case pretty completely. I just would like to ask you something else. So we mentioned the most famous cases about rappers being murdered that are Tupac Shakur, Biggie Smalls, and unfortunately Jam Master Jay. But this is just the tip of the iceberg, because there are many cases that are not that well known. One of them would be Scott LaRock, for instance, or Big L.
Well, I wrote the last ever interview with Scott LaRock just before his death. Did you know that?
No, you're telling me now. So I'm inviting you again next time to talk about Scott LaRock.
Oh, no, I wrote the very last interview with him. Oh, God, that was the saddest fucking thing. Yeah, Scott was one of the most intelligent people I've ever met in hip-hop. I spent like a couple of days with him in the Bronx, and we toured all the old landmarks. And, hip-hop didn't begin in the South Bronx. It actually began in the West Bronx. And so we toured all the Bronx landmarks, and he told me about going to see, Coke LaRock and Bambaataa and all that stuff. And he gave me this whole history of, because, he's from the Bronx himself, Scott. And, and he gave me this whole history of the Bronx. I got to send you this. I can't believe you've never seen this thing. It's the most famous interview with Scott LaRock. Are you going to edit this interview?
Wait, not yet. Let me ask you my final question. How do you explain that the word of
I was just going to stop the interview and just send you the article now.
No, wait, no, yet. You can do it tomorrow. No problem. Okay. Take your time.
But anyway, the point I was trying to make about Scott was that was, he was killed in the most petty way imaginable, right? He was like some stupid beef. Like, I think it was D-Nice, a friend of his, was dating some girl, and some other guy who had dated her previously was upset, and he
tried to defuse the situation.
He went back to the car, and then they came up to the car and shot him. I mean, one of the reasons I got very disillusioned with hip hop was, I mean, I used to, as well as writing about hip hop, I ran a hip hop club in New York called Brutal. And it ended very badly. We had an African Bambata Zulu Nation reunion, peace, love, and unity. It said it ended in a gun battle and people got hurt. And, that wasn't, I'm still continuing to love hip hop, but there came a point when I was like, I mean, I love this music. I don't love it that much. I'm willing to die over it. And there were just too many people who were dying. And Biggie's death hit me really hard because I'd interviewed him not that long before his death for New York Newsday. And he, in some ways he reminded me of Scott because Biggie was a very smart guy too. And I'm like, you know what? This is fucking insane, I mean, there's never been a form of popular music where so many people keep getting fucking murdered.
Murdered, indeed.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it didn't happen with rock and roll. It didn't happen with R&B. It didn't happen with jazz. It didn't happen with funk. So there was clearly something about hip hop that was, I don't want to say encouraging, but it was certainly, connected to it. And a lot of it has to do where it comes from. But you know what? On the other hand, that's kind of like making excuses because, things like doo-wop came from very deprived backgrounds, right? I mean, funk came from deprived backgrounds. R&B came from deprived backgrounds. And they weren't killing each other every fucking week. So there came a time when I did become very, very delusional with hip-hop because of all the people who were being murdered. And some of them I knew and liked, And I did kind of wonder, is it worth it? Is it worth it that all these people are dying over this music? And so it created this crisis of confidence. And today, frankly, I listen to very little hip hop. And what I listen to is mainly like Afro beats and Latin music, which I actually think is the future. Anyway, there you go.
No, the only other musicians that were gunned down that I can think of right now would be Sam Cooke, John Lennon, and nobody else. So it's like two cases.
It's not like it's every fucking week like it was. I mean, that's the funny thing. People think about like hip hop is very violent now. I'm telling you, when I ran a hip hop club in the late 80s, it was a lot more violent. But the people getting shot just weren't that well known then. You could not go to a hip hop club like, say, Latin Quarter in Times Square or the Rooftop in Harlem without a gun battle breaking out. It was every single freaking time. And it was like, it just got really, I mean, I said earlier on in the interview, I don't get scared easily. I don't get scared easily. But you know what? After a time, when so many people are actually getting shot, I mean, I have friends who've been shot who weren't rappers. They were just standing there and they got shot, And I was lucky I didn't get shot. I could have been shot. But what is all this for in the end? You know what I mean? So Puff Daddy can appear on the cover of Vanity Fair, So yeah, I mean, I did, I started to question the values this music was promoting. The violence. I mean, I spent 10 years basically making excuses for the violence. And then there came a point when I said, no more excuses.
I'm totally with you. Frank, many thanks for your time. We can close our interview here because we covered this case pretty well. So thanks again for your very precious explanations. Thanks everybody else for watching this and see you all next time. Bye-bye.